All right, hi, I'm Isaac. I work on UI infrastructure at Facebook, and what I'm going to be talking about today is rich text editing with React. So your first question might be, why is this something that Facebook even cares about? Why rich text at all? So I'd ask you to consider the Facebook comment input. Normally you just think of that as plain text, but there's actually more going on there. So let's look at the anatomy of a Facebook input. So here's an example comment. All right, I type in, hey Christopher, what time is my #React conference talk? So it's not just plain text here. For one thing, we have mentions. I've tagged Christopher within the text. Another thing is that we have hashtags here. I've typed in a hash, written some text, and we decorate that too. So there's a little bit of rich text going on here beyond just the plain text. So prior to 2014, we had a pretty good solution for this. So here it is again, a little bit of decoration on both of them, just some blue background. The way we would do this is with a text area. Simple enough. It's just plain text. We don't really need anything else special beyond that. And for those blue highlighters, we would use divs, position behind it. So we would have two separate elements. One, just the plain text. The second, actually showing the highlighter to indicate that this is structured input. So what's the problem with this approach? First thing is that managing this kind of structured input with a text area and some highlighter divs is actually really hard to do. Going along with that, undo, redo, and copy, paste is pretty much broken for mentions. Like if you selected some text, copied it, pasted it within the input, it pretty much wouldn't work. Sometimes it would work, most of the time not. It also really limited the rich text capabilities that we had. So for example, if we ever wanted anything bold, if we wanted headers, list items, any kind of embedded media, forget it. We're not going to be able to do that because we just have a plain text area that we're using. Not only that, it required a lot of DOM measurement hacks. So if you think about a text area, as you're typing, the text area won't grow with you. You know, once you reach a certain number of lines, you actually have to calculate, all right, how much height do I need, and then apply the height to that text area to keep it growing properly. Going along with that, DOM measurement is also a problem and causing quite a few bad user experiences. This is a bug that happened, I don't know, dozens of times over the years. It kept coming up. It was always caused by something slightly different. It was like a fraction of a pixel off. Something would end up a little bit wrong, and you'd end up with this terrible, like, broken experience while you're typing a comment on Facebook. This is really, really bad. It just happened constantly, and it was always a big headache. We always had to deal with this. So it led to these poor user experiences. So we decided we wanted to make our inputs better. We wanted to solve a lot of these problems, entire classes of problems that we were running into, DOM measurement issues, structured input issues, trying to keep things in sync. So our first goal was to improve the flexibility and behavior of rich inputs across Facebook products. Not just comments, but also looking at other inputs that we have. So what are our options for rendering this kind of thing? Well, we've already seen one, a text area with some highlighters. This worked pretty well. We were using it for a long time, but we also saw what kind of problems we ran into with it. Another option is to draw all of the contents manually. In that case, we can draw whatever we want. We want bold text, headers, no problem. We can just render that. It would just be DOM. Of course, a drawback with that is if we're just using regular DOM, we also have to draw and position a cursor, which can be a really, really hard thing to do. We end up with a lot of the same problems with DOM measurement that we ended up with the previous solution. Now, there are a bunch of text editors that do this, but it also, you know, we've run into issues with DOM measurement. Maybe we don't want to do that. Having to like absolutely position a cursor, you know, come up with our own way to solve selection over multiple characters. You know, we could position it within the text node or something like that, but let's not try to do that yet. Or we could try contentEditable. And for anybody in the room or watching who's done any kind of development on a WYSIWYG editor, you're like, oh god, contentEditable. You're like kind of like rolling your eyes a little bit. So contentEditable is a super old feature in browsers. It was introduced around, I think, 2000 with Internet Explorer 5.5. So it's been around a long time. And you're thinking, wait a second. Like I said, if you've worked on this before, you're thinking contentEditable's terrible. Like, don't even try to do that. This is just a bad idea. And in fact, if you search on Google and you type in contentEditable, the very first thing that comes up is this awesome post by the medium engineering team about why contentEditable is terrible. And it's a really well-considered post about all of the things that contentEditable does poorly. So it's got this reputation. It's well-earned. Yes, it has problems. In fact, one of the biggest problems that it has is if you're here, you like to think of building a JavaScript application in the React way. You want to separate your state from your DOM. Your state instructs how your application is actually going to be rendered, and then the DOM is just there to render what you want and receive input. The problem with contentEditable is that the whole point is that the DOM and the state are the same thing. If you're changing something in the browser, that's your state, period. On top of that, one of the big issues that contentEditable has is that the DOM from one browser to the next is kind of a mystery. So for example, if I type in hello world, and then I put the cursor in between hello and world, and I press return. On Chrome, you'll end up with a text node and a new div. In Firefox, you'll end up with a break tag. It's just like, that's like a trivial example. Things get really out of hand if you're just trying to figure out what the DOM is going to do for any given event. But it gives us a lot of really useful stuff for free. So let's talk about the good parts of contentEditable. There are some. First thing, it works in all browsers. I mentioned that it was introduced back in 2000. Everyone still implements it, so it's available everywhere. That's awesome. We need to worry about that at Facebook. That's important to us. The next thing, we get native cursor and selection behavior for free, and that's not to be underestimated. If you put the cursor into a contentEditable and you hit the arrow keys, it just moves it for you. If you arrow down, the browser will move the cursor for you. That's a big deal. You don't have to worry about how you're going to position it within the text. Next, we get native input events. We get key down, key press. We get internationalized input, Chinese, Japanese, Korean. All of those things work by default in contentEditable. We don't have to re-implement anything. We get any rich text features we want. If we want to introduce bold, headers, italics, embedded photos, things like that, we could do that. contentEditable supports it. We get automatic auto-growing. No more of that DOM measurement to figure out how high it's got to be. If you've got a div with contents inside it, as the contents grow, the div grows too. And it's accessible by default. And this is something that we really care about a lot at Facebook. We have millions of users who use screen readers. contentEditable provides accessibility by default. So our second goal then is to integrate seamlessly into React applications. More and more, we were beginning to build our components, our applications with React. And so we wanted to build something that made sense. It would be a comfortable API, a familiar API for people to be able to use to add text editing into their app. So again, our first goal, improve the flexibility and behavior of our inputs. Let's try contentEditable. The second goal, integrate seamlessly into React applications. We have our state. We want that to lead to rendering. We don't want them to be tied together the way that contentEditable does by default. So our objective was to build a controlled contentEditable, much in the same way that you would see like a controlled React DOM input, where you have a state and an on change. We wanted to accomplish something similar. So let's talk about what it means to create a controlled contentEditable. The first thing, we need strict control of the contents. You've been building with React. You're doing that anyway. That's pretty familiar. The next thing is strict control of the cursor. In much the same way that React wraps the imperative DOM APIs, when you're adding elements, removing nodes, that kind of thing, we can do the same thing with the native selection API, which is similarly imperative. We wanted to create a declarative, understandable API so that it would be familiar to people building React applications. We wanted to be able to support all of the great features that you expect from text editing on the web and in your own text editors, internationalized, cut, copy, paste, spell check, all of it. And we wanted to be able to support arbitrary rich text. We don't know what Facebook products are going to look like in 3 years, 4 years. We want to make sure that any rich text composition that's going to be created can have a lot of support, so that we can build whatever crazy ideas that we have. So let's talk first about the strict control aspect. Controlled contents, what does that mean? Well, let's go back to our example, hello world. I've typed that in. I want that to be 2 lines. So I'm going to put the cursor right between the 2 words, and I'm going to press return. I listen for a key down. In a contentEditable, I already told you, we kind of don't really know what's going to happen. It could be any number of different things. So the browser output is going to be kind of a mystery. So we don't allow it to happen. We prevent default on it. We know what we want to do in our state. And let's say from a high level, we want to split one text block into 2 text blocks. We can do that in our model and then render. It's just React. This is pretty familiar. There we go, 2 blocks of text. We have total control of what this DOM looks like with any React app. But what about the cursor? We've taken one div and we've turned it into 2 divs, and the browser has no idea where to put the cursor anymore. So the thing is, we know where the cursor belongs. This isn't as simple as taking a text area and just putting the cursor at offset 5. Because this is DOM, it's not just plain text. But the good thing is, we know what the DOM structure is going to be, so we know exactly where we can put the cursor, right there. So we can use the imperative native selection API to put the cursor where it belongs, and we can continue typing. Let's talk a bit about the model. What exactly does our state look like when we're representing this rich text editor? The way to think about it is as a snapshot of the complete state of the text editor. And what does that entail? It's not just contents. It's also what's the cursor doing. It's also an undo redo stack. It's a lot of things. An undo redo we have to do, I'll note, because we're not using the native content editable undo redo behavior because we're controlling everything ourselves. So that's something we're going to have to track too. So let's talk about what this editor state looks like. Here's an example. This is the Gettysburg Address. It's pretty short, 4 paragraphs of text. If we're going to think about what a snapshot of this looks like, we could say, OK, we've got this plain text string. No problem. That works fine for the Gettysburg Address, but what if you want something that's like 50 Gettysburg Addresses? What if you're trying to represent Ulysses? It's not going to work so well to have a single plain text string and just try to operate on that. So what we'll do instead is we'll break it apart into discrete chunks, blocks, and we'll represent that with a record. And this is just an object that represents all of the data about this block. And I'll note that it's going to be an immutable record, and I'll come back to why. So here's what we've got in there. We've got some text, the plain text there. We know that it's a paragraph. We've got some inline style information, maybe some other information on there too. We're going to represent all of that within that object. So what we have here is basically just a list of records. So our entire content state can just be represented as a list of blocks. Pretty straightforward. All of these will be immutable. We'll see why. Persistent data is super, super valuable in this kind of a framework. So going back to our example here, let's say that I want to, I don't know, insert some text into that second paragraph. Lorem ipsum, blah, 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 blah. I type into that second paragraph. You'll notice that's the only paragraph that's actually affected by anything here. Everything else is exactly the same. So what that means is that that's the only place where I need a new record. So as we go from one snapshot to the next, 3 of those blocks are exactly the same, and we can maintain persistence among all of those and create just one new record to represent our new changed content. We also need to represent a cursor snapshot. We want to be able to put the cursor wherever we want, given some like coordinate within our document. So we can put keys on each of our blocks. Let's say we want the cursor at the beginning of paragraph 2. What that means is that, oh, this is key B, great, so we can represent with a record again what our cursor is. Starts at B, ends at B, starts at 0, ends at 0. Really simple. So you can use these coordinates to represent your entire cursor state, your entire selection state. Again, this is an immutable. So let's say that I then move my cursor, I press the down arrow key to move the cursor down 1 line. And that's going to be, I'll go ahead and spoil it. It's 97 characters, I counted it. So we're going to arrow down and put the cursor there. What we can do is observe when the browser does that. And we say, oh, there's a select change. What does that mean? And because we have control over the DOM, we know exactly where that cursor is now within our state. So we could say, OK, we're done with that record. Now we've got a new one. So anytime you move the cursor, we're creating a new state, a new record for that cursor. But it's OK because we don't need the old one anymore. That can just get garbage collected. So let's talk about undo redo, because this is where the immutable aspect of this model really starts to shine. This is where it really gets awesome. So let's say we start at state A. And in this case, it's just a comment input with an empty string. There's nothing there. And we're going to type in the first sentence of the Gettysburg Address, 407 years ago. I've typed all that out, and now I'm at state Z. How did we get from state A to state Z? Well, we typed in all of these characters, so we have all of these intermediate states, all of these intermediate snapshots. One way that we could represent this is by, I don't know, recording every single operation that occurred, and maintaining information about all of those intermediate transactions. But if you think about it, if you wanted to undo from Z to A, think about how it works in a regular text editor on the web or on Microsoft Word. If you put the cursor in and then just start typing and then undo, it doesn't undo one character at a time or just a few at a time. It undoes the whole sentence because you just contiguously typed. So based on a few different heuristics and rules based on native browser behavior, we can identify boundary states where undo behavior should jump back to. And we can actually get rid of all of those intermediate states. We can go back from Z directly to A and just play back that snapshot again. So all of these intermediate states, similarly, boom, garbage collected. We don't need them anymore. Then when we want to play back from Z to A, we just do that. We set A as our new state and we render. What that means is that if you're creating a whole bunch of edits within your document, changing a whole lot of stuff, you end up with a lot of snapshots. It's lots and lots and lots of them. But the awesome thing is, because you're persisting data from one snapshot to the next, and because we don't care about any of those intermediate states, we can actually just get rid of most of them. And what we're left with is actually just a handful of snapshots, even for a lot of state changes, with a relatively small memory footprint with a lot of data sharing between them. Not only that, immutables give us purely functional state updates, and this is really awesome. I'll go through an example here. So let's look at mentions again. Here's our text input again. I'm going to say, all right, I am hosting live from the Grand Hyatt. And I want to mention Grand Hyatt in there, so I put that @ sign at the beginning of it. And if you've written a comment on Facebook, you know that gives you this little drop-down thing, and you can press return and add a mention, live from the Grand Hyatt San Francisco. So this isn't just as simple as dumping in some new text. This is actually kind of a complex operation that happened here. We took one string, we modified it, we applied some metadata to it. So let's walk through what that actually looks like. What is this operation? This is a pretty complex operation. Let's try to break it down. So we're going to define some function add mention, and it's going to receive an initial state snapshot. And here's what that could look like. It's just a record, the plain text, live from the Grand Hyatt. Now what we're going to do on this is first, we're going to remove Grand Hyatt. It's pretty straightforward. We need to replace that text with something else, so we're just going to remove it completely. So we'll call some function remove text on that initial state. And what we're going to get back is another immutable record with the state of the text, the state of the editor after the removal has taken place. So we're now done with that one, and we've got a new record in place. That's state after removal. And it just says live from we've removed the other text. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to insert Grand Hyatt San Francisco, our full structured text that we expect to be there after the mention. And for that, we'll call some function insert text. And what this is going to do, it's going to receive the state that we just got from the previous function call, and we're going to apply some text to that and return another new state. So we're done with that one. And we now have another record live from the Grand Hyatt San Francisco with the full text. The next thing we want to do is apply a mention to the text range. So we're going to go ahead and do that, pass in state after insertion, apply mention is going to apply some metadata to it, and we get the state with the new text and the mention applied. So we're done with that previous record, and now we have our final record. And you can think of that one as just some reference to a blob of metadata that has information about the Grand Hyatt San Francisco. And that's the one we return. So we passed in some initial state, and we returned some output state. There are no side effects here. We're just removing text, inserting text, and applying text, or applying metadata. So for those intermediate states, we're done with them. We don't need them anymore. We can just return that record, and that's what we're going to render. So you can express a complex edit operation as a composition of simple, easily testable operations, no side effects or anything. Everything is just a snapshot. So I want to do a couple of demos here to show some of the awesome things that we've built and some of the easy changes that can be made just by changing one React component. So first, I'll talk about Facebook comments. So we've now seen a few examples of comments. And here's the status update that I posted last week. It's got some comments on it. And what we're going to do is go down to the bottom to that input, and we're going to comment. We're going to write a comment, and we're going to tag somebody. In this case, I'll just tag my wife. So I'm typing in, oh, cool, great status update. Hey, Maddie. I don't know if you can see it on these screens, but there's a blue background like we saw before when you mentioned somebody. Yeah, cool, blue background. All right, so here's what I'm doing. I'm going to change some code. I'm going to get rid of that original class name. I'm going to apply a new style. What this is going to do is going to make the font bold, and it's going to insert the photo of the person that I mentioned. So delete that, reload the page. So this is all like on my sandbox on Facebook.com. All right, let's go back down there. And now, this time, let's see a profile picture when I mention my wife with some bold text. There it is. Cool. So you notice I didn't really change very much in that code. It was just like, here's how we want to decorate this mention, and I can just like swap out a class and stick in a style object. Pretty straightforward. The next demo I want to do is the Facebook Notes editor. So we relaunched the Notes product, which was a long-standing product, launched back in like 2006, and kind of like not really kept up that well. We said, okay, we want to redo the whole thing. Let's actually build a good long-form composition experience on Facebook. So in September and then through the fall, we rolled out the new Facebook Notes product, and the editor is built with this same framework. So here's a sample note that I threw together, and I'm going to demonstrate some of the features that this has. So let's open the editor. Right, so this is just a text editor. So we can use mentions the same way here as we could in that comment input. So what it means is that mentions are available basically anywhere where this framework is being used. We can do block level styling. So in this case, let's just make that a header. We want a secondary header. Okay, well, I'll type in some text and then make that one a secondary header. Cool, a little bit smaller. Block quotes. You can do all kinds of crazy styling here to make it look really nice. So it's just CSS applied to this, knowing that it's a block quote. Bold, italic, underline, sure. We can also add links. In this case, I'll link to my favorite website, Zombo.com. And there we go. Now we have a link. Perfect. We can do code blocks, too. So anywhere where we're in a Facebook product where we're using this, we can just have styled blocks like this, inline styles like this. Yeah, cool, code block. You can embed photos in here. So this is an Instagram photo I took last fall. And we have these resize handles. So this uses the Spring library, Rebound.js. So you can build these awesome interactions. And this is, again, all still within a rich text editor. You can have a caption, an input within the editor. We have these list items, which you can add depth to. So I'm just doing tab, shift tab. Cool. Same thing with the ordered lists. Do a little more shifting, unshifting. So then this is a feature I'm super excited about. A UI engineering intern who I'm working with, Tosti, he's in the house tonight. He has been working on getting third-party embedded content working. So here's a Vimeo link. Boom, we have a video. So this is not just a video like, hey, cool, we can actually, I mean, I don't know if this is useful, but you can go ahead and play it while you're editing your thing. So sorry, we don't have any audio here. It's a sweet OK Go video from Vimeo. But you can just keep editing. So we can have these kind of like really awesome embeds within the content. So we found that this has been a pretty good solution for us at Facebook. We have a lot of different products that are using it. It's used on Newsfeed for comments. It's used in what we call the Composer, the status update box. It's used on Messenger.com. It's used when you're uploading photos. It's used, we're playing around with it in chat. It's used in notes. There are a lot of different places where we're using this solution. So when we find solutions that we're pretty happy with, we like to share them with the community. So we are announcing, as of this morning, we are open sourcing the framework for this. So, so we're calling it Draft.js. You can go to draft.js.org. Check it out. All the code's on GitHub. A whole bunch of examples that demonstrate a lot of the really awesome things that you can build with this. I'm super excited about this to see the kind of rich text composition experiences that you guys out there might come up with. We found it to be a really great solution for the things that we're building at Facebook, so hopefully you guys will feel the same. We'd love to hear your feedback. Last thing, nothing gets developed in a vacuum, so I want to say a big thank you to all the people at Facebook who've contributed to this, either through code or by starting to use the input within your products and stress testing it, filing bugs, all of these things. These things don't just happen. A lot of people have to put in a lot of time and energy and work and code into it. And so I just want to give a big thank you to all these people. Can we give them a round of applause, please? Awesome. Thanks. I really went through that pretty quickly, it looks like. So thanks very much for your time, and happy editing.